Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Our civilization, which subsumes most of its predecessors, is a great ship steaming at speed into the future. It travels faster, further, and more laden than any before. We may not be able to foresee every reef and hazard, but by reading her compass bearing and headway, by understanding her design, her safety record, and the abilities of her crew, we can, I think, plot a wise course between the narrows and bergs looming ahead. And I believe we must do this without delay, because there are too many shipwrecks behind us. The vessel we are now aboard is not merely the biggest of all time, it is also the only one left. The future of everything we have accomplished since our intelligence evolved will depend on the wisdom of our actions over the next few years. Like all creatures, humans have made their way in the world so far by trial and error. Unlike other creatures, we have a presence so colossal that error is a luxury we can no longer afford. The world has grown too small to forgive us any big mistakes. In 1943, what became known as the Green Revolution began when Mexico, unable to feed its growing population, shouted for help. Within a few years, the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations founded the International Rice Research Institute in Asia, and by 1962, a new strain of rice called IR-8 was feeding people all over the world. IR-8 was the first really big modified crop to make a real impact on world hunger. In 1962 the technology did not yet exist to directly manipulate the genes of plants, and so IR-8 was created by carefully crossing existing varieties, selecting the best from each generation, further modifying them, and finally finding the best. Here is the power of modified crops. IR-8, with no fertilizer, straight out of the box, produced 5 times the yield of traditional rice varieties. In optimal conditions with nitrogen, it produced 10 times the yield of traditional varieties. By 1980, IR-36 resisted pests and grew fast enough to allow 2 crops a year instead of just 1, doubling the yield. And by 1990, using more advanced genetic manipulation techniques, IR-72 was outperforming even IR-36. The Green Revolution saw worldwide crop yields explode from 1960 through 2000. The basis of all life on Earth is the cell. All creatures on Earth are made of cells. I am not gonna dwell on the biology of cells and much it is not that relevant. But I do want to point out a few things. First of all, there are two sorts of cells. As we think all the prokaryotic cell, which is fairly simple and it is the thing that all bacteria are made of. And then we have a eukaryotic cell, much more complicated beasts on the right, which did not appear until well into the history of the biosphere on Earth. And there are many single-celled eukaryotes. But there are also an importantly multicellular organisms and all of those are based on the eukaryotic cell. I'm just going to take on the stuff where left off. The whole I want to now talk about it's called melatonin. And the synthesis is in the pineal gland, which is very small. It is the size of a pea in your brain. The corpus is the site of the soul, and it is where melatonin is made. And it has a rhythm as well. And in the sense, it is the opposite of the closum. It peaks at night. We call it as the darkness hormone. In every species that we studied, melatonin occurs at night. And it's hormone that prepares you for the things that your species does at night. So, of course, in humans we sleep, but animals, like rodents, they are awake. It's hormone that is related to darkness behavior. We can ask two fundamental questions about animal behavior, they referred to as proximate and ultimate. Proximate questions are those concerned with the mechanisms that bring about behavior, ultimate questions are those concerned with the evolution of behavior. We can divide the proximate and ultimate questions into two sub-questions. For proximate, how does the behavior develop, and secondly, what causes the behavior? For ultimate, you can ask how did the behavior evolve, and secondly what is the adaptive significance of the behavior, what's its purpose? Together these comprise what are called Tinbergen's 4 questions about animal behavior. Nico Tinbergen was one of the founding fathers of the study of animal behavior. These questions represent the different ways of studying animal behavior, and understanding the difference between those 4 questions are fundamental to understanding behavior and indeed the whole of biology. How do we study animal behavior? Well, that depends on the type of question we're hoping to answer. Wind turbine is a device that will convert wind into mechanical movement, which we can use to power water pump or electricity generator. Now the power that the turbine creates is obviously dependent on the wind speed. It also depended obviously on the number of sails, the area of the sails and the angle of the sails makes to the wind. So you can imagine if the turbine blades flat onto the wind's going to just bend it. If there is slight angle when the wind hits it, it's going to turn the blades. We can use that for powering things. Now, we're going to have a go, making some of the very, very simple paper windmills, a sort of things that you can make from the bits and pieces lying around home, and use that to drive very small generator to power electronic devices. Here are 3 important factors in creativity: people, process and product. The most important one is the process. First, you have to create the right person through education with a creative mind. Second, you have to create the right process to have people engaged in innovation process. Third, you need to find the right problem to work on. Human beings can survive and prosper largely depending on the creativity they have. If you identify and assess the creativity of a finished product, it is taken as a proxy for the creativity of the person who produced such a product. Therefore, a creative product should be surprising, original, beautiful and useful. People should have factors necessary for genius, ability, and right mindset. So, let me talk about the polar regions, just to clarify exactly what we mean. And we have first of all the Arctic at the top of the Earth and the Antarctic at the bottom, and so the Arctic was named after the Greek word for bear. Now surprisingly it's not after the polar bears that live in the Antarctic or live in the Arctic, and based on it's after the Little and Great Bear constellations that can be seen in the sky. Now the Greek also hypothesized that there would be the Anti-Arctic, which is how we get the name Antarctica, and of course it wasn't discovered until much later on. Now these regions are opposite in many ways other than just their names and their location on the globe, and so if we look at the Arctic first of all, and the Arctic is actually ocean surrounded by land, and so you can see here this is the UK down here and this kind of Russia and then American Canada around here, and so there is a bit of land cover in our ice on the top in the Arctic, which is Greenland here and Marseille, this area here. Surprisingly a lot of people don't realize that this isn't actually land. The North Pole isn't on land. It's just one big ocean. So what do we mean by well-being? Health, happiness, a sense of achievement and contentment, a state of mind and body where people can thrive. Well-being is not something that is purely limited to people who are facing extraordinary challenges in their lifestyle, health or personal circumstances. Everybody here has a level of well-being. Music so often forms an intuitive part of our well-being management. Music to pick us up, music to calm us down, music to heal our sorrows. Our aim through research is to move from this level of intuitive application of music through to informed use in our communities to take the next step in the understanding of the power of music in human life. Music already works for us on so many levels, whether it's soothing and teaching our infants, bringing people and communities together, adding spirit to our work and personal endeavors, but there is no reason to stop here. This is a kind of object that you're probably all familiar with when you had the term robot, but I'm gonna show you the very first robots. These were the very first robots. They were characters in a play in the 1920s called Rossum's Universal Robots, and the play was written by Czech writer called Karel Čapek. And basically, these robots, people tend to think of robots as kind of cute cuddly toys or, Hollywood depictions kind of devoid of politics. But the first robots were actually created and imagined in a time of absolute political turmoil. You just had the First World War, it finished and had a devastating impact across Europe, and so people are kind of reflecting on, what does it mean to be human, what makes us human, those kinds of questions. And this kind of context is what inspired Čapek to kind of write this play. And interestingly, these robots being human, they are actually in the play assembled on a production line, a bit like the Ford manufacturing production line. So even though they are human, they are assembled, and these robots are designed to labor, and that is their primary purpose in society.
Audio Jungle.